Hello and welcome everyone. Welcome to our Through the EDI Looking Glass of Leadership, our virtual conversations with leaders on the topic of diversity and inclusion. I'm Rina Goldenberg Lynch, and I'm the founder and CEO of Voice at the Table. And we're a London-based diversity and inclusion consultancy. And our aim today is, and this year across the entire year, is to amplify the message that diversity and inclusion is key to business success. To do so, we begin our series of chats with leaders in which we learn how they utilize equity, diversity, inclusion, belonging, and any other derivative of that concept to help them address challenges, to make plans that deliver to a wider audience, and to devise strategies for the future of the business. A brief word about the structure of these sessions. I will initially spend about 30 to 40 minutes speaking to our guest, and then we'll invite our live audience to ask questions of our guest. We also have a number of pre-submitted questions, so we'll hopefully get to them as well. So let's begin. My first guest today is Mark Walley, CEO of STEP. And STEP is a professional association for practitioners in the trust and estate planning area. And this is an important part of the wealth management sector. With years of experience in the finance sector, including over 20 years at Barclays Bank, Mark knows the sector very well. He knows anything about the industry challenges and the trends, and he also understands the importance of diversity and inclusion in this sector. Now, Mark and I have known each other for about 7, 8 years. You've been a regular guest at our events as both a speaker and also recently as a winner of our award in last year's EDI Journey Milestones Award. It was the Impact Award that you won. So the impact Mark has created with his inclusive leadership style at STEP has also led STEP itself to winning a Diversity and Inclusion Award in the sector last year. So I'm very, very pleased to welcome you to our first leadership conversation, Mark.
Thanks very much, Rina. Delighted to be with you.
Thank you, Mark. And before we begin, I want to ask you this question, as I will ask every other guest of ours, is what does our theme, seeing EDI as key to business success, what does it mean to you?
Yeah, so for me, it's really about inclusion and belonging. So everything that we deliver as organizations is delivered through people. And if people can feel included and feel as though they belong, then they can be their best and they can give their best. And that's been a realization I had many, many years ago, that if you want to get the best out of people, you've got to create the conditions for them to be their best and allow them to be their best. And it was obvious to me, obvious is an interesting word, I suppose, in this context, but it was just one of those things of, well, if people don't feel welcome and included, how can they give their best? So that's why it's so important to me.
Yeah, that's great. And it actually resonates with me as well, especially now where we're asking people to do so much more with a lot more information than before, and a lot less time. So in order to make sure that they can deliver as well, we have to make sure they all feel valued and respected. So I think that message is even more important as we go on. But let us also get to know you a little bit better as a leader. So we'll start with your journey in this space and just more broadly. Let me ask you this question. What has inspired you in the first place to pursue this career?
So to be CEO of STEP, now, did I ever think I would have a job like this? So STEP is the Society of Trust and Estates Practitioners, and our members, we're a membership organisation, do that work. They help their clients to plans to the transfer of wealth across generations. That's the primary area that they focus in. So what got me into this? Well, when I was at school, did I ever imagine I would be CEO of any organization, let alone of this type of organization? No. I was going to be a soldier. I was following in my father's footsteps. Then I realized that I didn't really want to do that. And but I did know that I wanted to be in roles that were people focused. And I joined a bank, had a conversation with a manager in the first week, and he said, "Is this a career or a job?" I was 18. I had no idea really what the question was, let alone what the answer ought to be, but decided that career sounded like a better answer. Didn't know why. Told me to go to college and get qualified to be a banker, which was probably one of the best bits of advice I ever had in career terms, though I didn't know it at the time. When I left the bank, I went to consulting for a while, all around sales and service and culture change around those, which got me heavily invested into people and getting the very best out of people and creating the conditions for that. After a while, I then I went to work for what was the Chartered Institute of Bankers, which had been where I had my qualifications from. So that got me into the world of professional bodies. And then that combination of professional bodies and a background in banking, and particularly in international wealth management, eventually led me to this role here at STEP.
Well, but what it does show is that you didn't strategize, you didn't plan out your career in advance, or somebody did it for you, which happens a lot. But I also know that not everyone gets to choose their career, and sometimes it's about finding your path. And particularly in my experience, speaking to women throughout my career, and me being one of those people, is I also kind of pursued a path that took me wherever I ended up. It's here, but I never thought about where I'm going. And women tend to also not necessarily be quite strategic about how they go about their careers. And the point I'm making is it's quite helpful to have gone through that experience yourself in order to understand people who also may not have had the benefit of planning, the benefit of being strategic.
And, did I have the benefit of planning, the benefit of being strategic? Yes and no. Certainly in the first years of the career, definitely not. In the structure of the bank, you were told where to go and what job you were going to do. And you did the job to the best of your abilities and hoped you climbed the greasy pole. As I got further into that career, I started to plan it a little bit more, but things happen and you make choices, and sometimes they work and sometimes they don't. A couple of examples where I'd been in a particular type of role in branches and then wanted to switch into a more strategic role, did that, really enjoyed it. Got to a point where I was desperate to have a particular title, which I then got, and everything that went with it, and realized that was about the last thing in the world that was going to get me out of bed every morning in a happy state. So had to just be honest with myself and say, I've chosen the wrong thing for all the wrong reasons. And that was at quite a senior level. That was about being a chief operating officer. Brilliant roles for the right people. I just wasn't the right person for that role. But it was great learning experience. Some real positives out of it, not least learning what I don't enjoy doing every day.
Yeah, and it's probably great practice ground, a training ground, if you will, for leadership later on. And I want to kind of make that transition into what makes an inclusive leader. And before we go into that, would you share with us your thoughts on what it means to be an inclusive leader? As an inclusive leader, how do you lead?
Yeah, we've talked about this before, and you know that I sometimes go, I don't know, and you say you do, Mark. You just do it, and so
you do it every day.
So there is a little bit of blind spot for me on this. But I start with that piece around wanting everybody to be able to give their best and be their best. And how can you do that if you don't understand what motivates people, what demotivates people, what their goals and ambitions are. And if you're going to understand all of those things, you've got to be welcoming, you've got to be inclusive. So, yeah, so some examples of what I do in the day job. So we've got a team of around 50 people in our London head office. Yeah, some of the things to help make those connections, and I remember being the junior and having very senior managers somewhere up there in the hierarchy, and I've always wanted to be approachable. So anybody that starts, within a day or two of them starting, I'll have met them and said hello and just kind of welcomed them to the organization. Each month I take out the half dozen or so people that have had a birthday that month, and just for a relaxed lunch, celebrate birthdays. And that's to connect people from different parts of the organization. There's only 50 of us, you can virtually throw a hanky over us, but do we all talk to each other in a more relaxed setting? So that's it, celebrate birthdays, but also create those connections. All the new people, when they start, probably about 3 weeks in, I'll have a much more detailed conversation with them, share something about me, so they understand that I'm just a human being like they are, and that my motivations for my career, which has largely been about my family, and why I'm here, what we do as an organization, but importantly helping them to put their job into the context of the organization. So we go through the vision, the mission, the objectives, the strategy, and then we get to, and your job supports this in this way. Somewhere along the line as well, and probably 4 months or so in, we'll get a small group of new starters together, and again we'll just go out to lunch, and it's how is the joining experience? So we constantly want to learn from people, and one of the setups I'll have done in that earlier meeting is reminding all of our new entrants that amongst many of their superpowers, the one that is of most value to us as an organization in those early months is the superpower of observation and seeing things that once you've been inside an organization for some time, you just don't see because you've started to accept it as normal. So a real encouragement for people to ask lots of questions, why? If they don't get an answer that they understand, ask again. If they get an answer they don't agree with, ask again. And feel free to make suggestions, because we get blind to things. So it's that superpower of observation that we can tap into with everybody. And yeah, so those are some of the things that we do.
Yeah, that's lovely. So I'm just going to summarize some of the things that you said that are, I think, trademarks of an inclusive leader: being approachable, making sure that you're connecting people with yourself and with each other, celebrating together, being human, being the person who you are, not just a lofty title somewhere in an office. And it's the little things that matter. Small behaviors, small acknowledgements make a big difference. I also love the fact that you proactively invite the outsider perspective. I think that's a huge thing that even other inclusive leaders often overlook, inviting the challenge and really taking advantage of the fact that somebody's new or has a different experience. And you said you're a small company, and it might sound like it's easier to do in a small company. But my impression is that one of our clients is a global organization with a relatively new CEO. And she's been going around the various parts of her organization doing exactly that, speaking to people in small groups in different countries, so it's also feasible in a big organization like that as well. So.
And I build on that as well. Rina, because I worked in Barclays, who's got employed somewhere over 100,000 people in any given year. So you can create that within your division, within your team. It doesn't have to be necessarily organizational led. It's all about mindset. And one of the other things I'll just add as well is we look to start all of our monthly review meetings, our check-in meetings, with something that we've called the happiness score. It's a really simple 1 to 5. 5, the world and life couldn't be better. 1, couldn't be much worse, really. and there were all the questions around, well, what's the rating? What gets a 3 and what gets it? And it was like, that's not the point. The score isn't the point. The point of this is an opening to a conversation that gets a sense of how somebody is. And we encourage them to talk about it as an overall score, because sometimes you get this whole, what I think is nonsense of, well, the work me versus the home me. You're really lucky if you can make that separation. I've tried, and it's difficult. If something's going on in some other part of your life, it's hard for it not to affect the other parts of your life. So just talk to me about what's your score, and then talk to me about why. And it might be that you've got a relative who's unwell, and you're dealing with that in the background. You might not. That might all be fabulous, but you've got a colleague who's really, really irritating you at the moment. Whatever it is, let's hear about it, the good, the bad, and the ugly. But then it gives context to the whole conversation about kind of where have you got to with your objectives and everything else. So that's been a helpful tool for us. We do get sometimes caught up in the score rather than it's a conversation starter. But again, it was some way of bringing the human element into the check-in meeting. So more check-in than check-up. And to me,
the check-up, exactly. Well, this to me brings another sort of element or aspect of inclusive leadership, which is the understanding that as a person, as a human being, we cannot separate our feelings from work, and just be comfortable with bringing ourselves as a whole person into work, and then understanding the context that might impact on our day. And inviting that in as you did. And I love the idea. You have lots of little sort of ideas and tools with which to start these conversations and to bring people in. And I remember you telling me the story, and for the sake of the video, I think you should repeat it, about creating an environment where everybody can contribute with their own experience and understanding by uploading a little video. This was in a different.
So I spent a number of years with Royal Institution of Chartered Surveyors, and we were starting an EDI journey there, and it might even have been DEI in those days. The soup of the letters changes order every now and then. Probably DNI, But I was asked to be the executive sponsor, both internally and outwardly facing to our membership and the member firms. And that came as a surprise to me, because as a white middle-class man of a certain age, I was thinking, well, I don't really fit the profile to sponsor these types of programs. And there was the message, I thought one of my 2 female executive team members would be in the frame for this. But the message was, well, we want you because you're a frontline business leader, and it will feel much more like a business imperative if you're championing it than somebody who's not frontline, and certainly not HR, because then it's just an HR initiative rather than something important. One of the ideas, and I know we stole it from somebody, but with their blessing. And it was just brilliant. It was called Dare. We called it Dare to Share, and people would upload little videos and say, "This is me." And this was a 700-person organization with offices in 20 countries, I think. And some of the videos were just so moving and so touching We had people who came out on video, shared about family circumstances, all sorts of things. One of my favorites, which I thought was going to be a video about being a Black woman in a male-dominated industry and living in New York and kind of all sorts of different things, was actually about the first experience of having come from the Caribbean and spending Thanksgiving in the US, in New York, and not having a clue what to do with a turkey. And it was just so human and so real. I mean, lots of other facets of feeling slightly other came out of that. But the centering of this story on this huge turkey and what do you do with it in the context of Thanksgiving was just one of my standout memories of that whole campaign.
Love it. What a great idea. And it brought a different dimension of every individual into the office that would probably not have come out otherwise.
And it's one of those things that you have to put effort into. So you know, getting the first volunteers was relatively easy. There's always a few people who are prepared to share something. Then you've got to keep that momentum going, and that gets a bit harder and harder. But it started to become something that actually we didn't need I think we did something every week. People just started posting on the internal channels, which was brilliant. And then we switched it from daring to share to dare to ask, because we were beginning to run out of people who were prepared to say something proactively. And so the permission was granted that if you've got a question, ask the audience. Somebody will know the answer. So if you wanted to know what the main celebrant points perhaps in the Jewish faith was and what people do, or whether it's the Muslim faith or whatever, whether it's faith-based or many other elements of our very diverse community. But if you don't know, feel free to ask. Somebody will probably give you an answer. And again, that just broke down so many barriers. And we'd set all of this up with intent. So yeah, I sometimes get the language wrong. If I sort of try and follow the latest trends of EDI language, I'll mangle the words, I'll get something wrong. But I always want to position with people, and we did this with both of those campaigns, was that listen to the intent behind the statement rather than the actual words, and focus on that intent and then respond. Because that'll be a far more rewarding and enriching experience for everybody. And it worked a treat. Because sometimes I read some of the questions or comments and I'm thinking, wow, that's a bit, if you read the actual words, you could quite easily get offended. But if you took that step back to what's the intent, what's somebody trying to understand, and then it was much better. And I think this really, particularly when you're dealing across multiple languages. So you know, we sit here in the UK or in an English-speaking country, and we assume that everybody else speaks perfect English. And as you know, Rina, even between the UK and the US, English can be a very different thing and a very different meaning, let alone when you bring in the nuance of translation into another language and somebody operating in a second or maybe third language. You've got to focus on, okay, I've read the words, what's the real intent behind these?
Yeah, that's great. And actually, this just come up. This point about language came up with another client as well, where we had a mixed language group, and one of the native English speakers made the point that it's not appropriate to refer to women as females, which is, it's a relatively sort of perhaps well-established point. But then you heard the reaction of the German speaker and the French speaker and some of the other languages. They don't appreciate the nuance of that. and translated from their language, there's actually no connotation or other understanding to that terminology. So it just makes everything much more complicated if you inject that aspect as well into conversations. And we do always say that, and I love the fact that you said that in your video as well, is that it's okay to make mistakes. We're all going to be, none of us are going to be perfect. Language changes much quicker than we can keep up with it. In certain circles, it's no longer okay to say EDI either, So things change, and we need to focus on that intent, learn perhaps from the experience as we can, but not be afraid to make mistakes, so that we then we kind of stop the communication and the connection.
Yeah. And I've noticed as well sometimes that a non-native English speaker will use English words far more correctly than we do as native speakers.
Yes.
And I think, oh,
yes.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Interesting use of the word. Oh, that's the correct use of the word.
Yeah, and learn that way as well. So I think we've established you're a pretty inclusive leader. One more question on that point, which is how does one become that kind of leader? What is it that in your life, are you able to point to one or two, or maybe a couple of things that made you into the person you are today?
So there's I'm on the side of nurture, I think, in this debate. So nature versus nurture. I think we're all the product of our upbringing and our experiences. So I'll reference a few points for me along the way. Mm-hmm. So I was brought up so I was born in the 60s, and my father was a soldier. He'd been national service and decided to stay on. My mother was a housewife, because that's what mums did then. And it was fairly traditional. We weren't every Sunday we went to church. So I was, I guess, inculcated with the values of the Christian church. It's something that those values have stayed with me. I'm not a practicer of organized religion, but I believe in the values. So there's that part of it. There was something around a work ethic, about if you're going to do a job, you do it well and put the effort in. But also then through my working career, just observing what got the best out of me and of other people around me by our leaders or managers. And I suppose I'm lucky to have had more than 40 years of observing other people and what works and what doesn't work. And even my worst bosses, I've learned lessons from, and I'm mostly on the pile of don't do it like that. but it's a useful reference point to be able to think, well, if it's not like that, then what would it have to be like to engage me? And that works for me, and then I have to try and put myself in the shoes of others. And that then is about understanding what motivates and drives other people. So I suppose that's led me to trying to have those conversations to understand. I know that I will spend hours agonizing over I've got to do a message to the whole of the organization. I'll spend hours over the words because I'll be trying to think about all the different communication styles in the organization and what words might work for some and won't work for others. I'm sure I still get that wrong in a certain percentage of times, but to me, what you say and do really matter. And so it's about setting standards, being clear about what you expect, the standards you expect, but also clear about how you can help people to aspire to those, to be trained and educated to work in different ways. So it's right back to that. How do I help everybody be the best they can be, and recognize that everybody's best is different?
And I've had people say to me, seasoned leaders say, oh, well, I'm at this age, I've been programmed this way. There is no way I can change my leadership style. What do you say to that?
If they say so, then that will be true. So I'm very much if you say so, then it will be true. Whether that's I can't or I can.
Yeah, I love that. If you think you can or you think you can't, you're right.
Yeah, exactly. And that came out at a number of junctures in my career. And did I ever think? Well, we've already done it. Did I ever think I'd do this job? No. Or even a job something like this? Probably not. On the way to getting here, have I had disappointments and failures and setbacks? Absolutely. I talked about choosing a job that I realized I really shouldn't have chosen. But there have been other things that weren't so much in my control. And yeah, I've been in the toilets crying because I was in a job where I thought I couldn't do it. I was new into the job. I'd gone to work in Greece for the bank, and my boss, Monday morning, he shouted at me for something. It wasn't unusual for him to shout. Great guy, but he was fairly forthright. And I just disappeared. I just couldn't take it. And it, particularly for me on a Monday, because Sundays in Greece, in a one-bedroom flat, living on my own in a city where I couldn't really speak the language, and there was no English TV. But remember, this was pre-internet as well. So kind of my only opportunity to talk to people was physically. I didn't even have a telephone in the flat. So Mondays, I was usually fairly raw after a very difficult Sunday. A beautiful place, beautiful country, but 24 hours without much conversation can be hard. So Monday morning was tough. So I disappeared for a while, then came back, put my happy face on, or at least my stoic face, I think it probably was, and got on with it. But yeah, I've had lots of those moments, not necessarily crying in the toilets, but those moments of not really believing that I could do what I was there to do. And mostly what I then sit down and do is say, okay, so that's where I get planful. So what is it I don't think I can do? Why is it I don't think I can do it? What skill am I missing? What knowledge am I missing? And then kind of work out a plan.
But it sounds like you're very much in touch with, you're self-aware, you're in touch with yourself, your emotions, perceptions, and how people perceive you, and are also, you understand that you can change who you are if need be.
Yeah, I think we all can change. I mean, we all react in different ways in different circumstances. And I think the power of being able to recognize how you're feeling in a moment, but sometimes I'm really, really cheesed off with what's going on or with somebody, and I just have to come and go, recognize it, and then focus back on what are we trying to achieve? What's the context of this? But yeah, I occasionally get really shouty. I occasionally say the wrong things or get huffy. Doesn't everybody? My wife will tell you that I do all of those things.
We won't ask her, don't worry. Well, and that's the other thing, is to also, as a leader, an inclusive leader, it's understanding that there are circumstances under which you're much more vulnerable to sort of reverting to some of the behaviors that may not be welcome in the office, and making sure that you know how to deal with yourself in that situation. But also acknowledging that you're also human like everybody else, and it's okay. I often ask that question about crying in the workplace, in a mixed room, and I anticipate that a lot of the women in the room will raise their hands, me being one of them. And what did surprise me, but no longer surprises me, is how many men also do the same. So a lot of men experience some of the very same kind of, disappointments and emotional ups and downs in the workplace as women do. And that just goes back to, the fact we're all human, and we need to be, as a leader, need to be mindful of that.
Yeah.
We're making good headways, but I want to actually shift a little bit and focus on the sector and the challenges in the sector. So if you don't mind, why don't we start out with getting a sense for the picture of diversity and inclusion in the wealth management or the estate and tax planning sector?
Yeah.
Would you be able to give it?
Yeah, happy to do. I'm actually going to start with STEP as an organisation in terms of its members. So we're an organisation with 22,000 members spread in around about 100 countries right across the globe. And our membership base is, I was going to say roughly, but I'm going to say 52% female, 48% male. Our journey with EDI started a number of years ago, and we were for a relatively small organisation, considering what to do in the D&I space can be quite daunting. There's countless examples available and case studies, and usually I found that those come from a background of huge resources and huge money, or a combination of both. But we knew we had to do something, because we didn't really have an understanding of our demographics beyond that male-female split, and where in geography people sat. A quick look around, so in our governance structures, we have a council of 30-something members, geographically representative. We have a board that council helped to advise. And if you think about the role of a board in setting the strategy for the organisation, seeing the future for the organisation, what struck me as we looked around the room was that, so for an organisation, remember, 52% female, 48% male, the room was telling me it was male dominated. The room was telling me that we were almost all white. The room was telling me that we were almost all middle-aged or older. So and a few people said, "Oh, we need the data." And I'm going, "Have a look. The data's here." But we recognised the importance, and so we'll actually, that people were buying into the idea of, we want people to be able to be the best they can be. We want people to feel included. Our whole purpose as an organisation is about connection. It's about sharing knowledge. It's about creating a community. And if people don't feel welcome and included, you can't do that. So that was our start point. We didn't want to be seen as running by sort of older white guys. And we absolutely wanted to be clear that all were welcome, and that we could change the picture of representation on the various committees and the council and the board. And we did that. We put together a very clear policy around EDI and a statement that it meant something was important to us. We would challenge bias and discrimination, and we were going to make EDI part of our management and governance decisions. So kind of fast forward a number of years, and we did this through making sure that our vacancies had inclusive language, encouraged diverse applicants, clear expectations for the role. We made sure that if we needed representation from certain communities, that we would be clear about that. And we created a talent list as well. Fast forward, and our council, which remember was heavily older and male, has got a much better male-female split. We had 4 members appointed to that who were under 40 when they were first appointed. That had never been heard of, because we had this, well, you've got to earn your spurs, you've got to earn your place through experience. And it was like, well, don't we need some of the young views? And our current chair is actually one of those who came onto council below the age of 40 was elected as chair before they were 40. Never been heard of before. I think is the 6th female chair, 5th or 6th. So we've got a track record of successfully getting women to the top of the organisation. But we did all that by being upfront and open about it, but also being helpful and so one of the big things that we did was made sure that in everything that we published, there was a much better representation of our broader membership base. So you can't be what you can't see. Make sure that people can see people like them. So whether it's the magazine articles, the speakers at conferences, kind of any number of different ways. But we also showcased role models, did 60-second interviews that were published, and so from a very, very diverse community about why they're involved in the organisation, what they do for a job, and what it means to them. Made sure our social media posts have that good diversity in as well. So lots of new voices, diverse range of contributions for all of our publications. And help sheets for people. So if you're running a conference, think about these things. So speaker mix, accessibility, kind of all that stuff. That's where we put a lot of our focus for STEP. I think in the wider wealth management industry, there's that usual inversion. I think as there is in many professions, there are more women in the profession than there are men in many, not in all. But there are more men in senior positions. And it's not an area that we've put specific focus on, because we said we can't do that sort of thing until we've got our own house in order. But when you look at the data for the industry, there's definitely that dynamic going on. And I think the challenge is, how do they change? And I think some of that is going to be forced, particularly in the sector we're in. The high net worth, ultra high net worth clients are more aware, and the new generations coming through are more aware. So the traditionalist who has worked, traditionalist advisor who's worked with a traditionalist client, that's okay, that works for them. That traditionalist advisor probably isn't going to get on so well with the next generation or the generation after that. And when people are talking about, well, I'm not so bothered about minimizing tax, I want to make a very fair contribution on tax, I'm more interested in true ESG credentials and not greenwashed. I want to explore the opportunities of social responsibility or giving in a philanthropic way. Then it's going to take a whole different range of skills and knowledge. And so I think there's a change that's got to happen, otherwise clients will disappear. So people who can do that. There's some great examples I've heard, and just again, it's small things. And I would say anybody that wants to make real change in this space, do lots of small things that make an impact. Don't worry about having some big grand overarching program. Find some really practical things that make a difference. Where I remember somebody talking me through, they were going to go and pitch to a client. They suddenly said, we're the wrong demographic to go and pitch. So they built a completely different team to go and do the pitch, who were also representative who do the ongoing management. And they won the deal because everybody else sent in their usual pitch team of 3 men and a woman versus actually thinking through who the client was and matching it. Yeah, small things make big differences.
Couldn't agree more. I totally agree with that. And I think, I do want to emphasize the success that you have brought to change around STEP and STEP representation in terms of diversity and inclusion, not just diversity. And also emphasize the point, which is what we keep harping on about, is that it started with a strategic need. You know, you're a global organization, you needed that representation, you needed that trust and loyalty from those members. And in order to do that, you have to understand them and you have to reflect them. So that's the most sort of, I suppose, natural way to look at diversity and inclusion as a strategic prerogative. But then also, as you talked through the trends, the emerging trends in the wealth management sector, you know, it's increasingly becoming clearer and clearer that you know, there are so many demands on the traditional industry that they're not going to be met unless there is this fresh sort of influx of voices and perspective and experiences, and that's where the future of, I think, that sector and any sector really lies. And we're going to open the floor up for questions. So if you have a question, you can raise your hand, or if you like to speak out out on video, or if you prefer, pop it into the chat as well for Mark. And Mark, while we wait for these questions, I have a couple more also that were pre-submitted. Let me start with this one. What advice would you give to other leaders about the power of diversity and inclusion to help them succeed?
Okay. So you said some very flattering things about me as a leader, and that's all. Yeah, that's lovely and slightly embarrassing. But for me, it's back to, if you want to get the best out of people, you've got to understand what motivates them and drives them. If you're going to do that, they've got to feel welcome and included. And for me, everything around, well, inclusion leads to diversity. So if you can make people feel included, you'll get more diversity. If you make people feel welcome, you'll get more diversity. The challenge then is to make sure that, having enticed people in, you're still making them feel welcome and included. Because we've all had that, possibly years ago, that experience of changing the recruitment process and then the sort of body rejecting the organ. Yeah, somebody arrives and they go,
yeah.
The written stuff was great, the actual experience is not so great. So for me, yeah, it's all about being inclusive will help you get the best from everyone.
Yeah, and being inclusive means listening, observing, and you know, understanding, or trying to understand, being curious and non-judgmental.
Yeah.
Not putting words in your mouth, I hope.
No, well, as I've said, I sometimes struggle with this because there are things I just do and don't think about them in that way. And then people are very kind enough to tell me that that's why you're inclusive. Now, is it? I thought that was just being normal and human.
Obviously not. Okay, well, thank you for that. And there are a couple of other questions that were pre-submitted. I think one around how you weave inclusive behaviors and focus on diversity into leadership at STEP. I think you've told us a lot about that already. Is there anything else that you'd like to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, we've got a core set of values here. So community, collaboration, continuous learning, and integrity. Now, you know, they're really important to us. A variation on those themes will appear in many organizations. Sat behind those, we've got a whole bunch of behaviors that we expect. And there's something we've done as an organization, both for our members and volunteers in particular, but also for all the staff within STEP. So, well, these are the behaviors we expect. And with your help, the team at Voice of the Table, we created those behaviors. We created specific to STEP examples of what good or not so good might look like in the different behaviors. And that's part of our whole induction process, both for staff members and volunteers in different committees and communities. So we're very clear that these are what we see as good behaviours, these are what we see as bad behaviours, or behaviours that need working on. So with that clarity, we then can help people and say, yeah, that's great, you're doing it, or actually, we might need a bit of refinement and work on this. Here's how other people might be receiving it. And we've got those types of examples in the videos. There's workbooks for those that prefer reading. So that sits there, but also then as CEO and with my executive team and in the staff line of things, and then with the board and our council in our member side of things, and we have an EDI committee of the board as well. We're the leaders that have got to demonstrate the right behaviours and demonstrate our support for our principles, for our values and those behaviours. We take it seriously. We've agreed that we're not right for some people.
No, that's
we're comfortable with that because we're not.
Yeah, exactly. That actually leads well into the next question, which has come in through the chat. And this is on the topic of some people critiquing some of the work that people like you and I and others do as positive discrimination. So how would you address that in the context of needing the additional representation and therefore perhaps, you know, attracting the part of society, part of your membership that isn't represented, and yet, you know, some people might push back on it and say, well, you just, you know, that's positive discrimination.
So for me, there's something in this around, and we use the word equity. We started off with equality, and there's some fabulous, just sort of type into Google equity versus equality and look at the images. And there's some great examples in there of the difference of those things. So it's great if you've been to, and I'll use English context here. If you've been to a public school and you've been surrounded by people with parents from professional backgrounds who've got a network and they get engaged with the school, and if somebody wants to know about being a lawyer, well, there's this bunch of parents over here who can help you, or you want to be an accountant, there's another bunch of parents over there, or whatever it might be. And the school will have additional, beyond the standard curriculum, they'll be teaching about public speaking, about some of the social skills and everything else. Now, it's not to say that doesn't happen in the state sector, but sometimes they're putting far more time into the pure educational subjects because people are starting from a lower base. So sometimes people do need a helping hand. And you know, I don't see a problem with that, because for me, it's about what's the potential. What's the potential of an individual? So if I've got somebody who's got more potential than this homogenous group, boy, do I want that person in my group, because we can help them unlock that potential. So I don't think you should ever compromise your basic standards and saying, well, we need somebody who's at least at this baseline level. But then if you need somebody with a particular representation or a particular different thought process, then go for it. You know, I just personally, I don't see the problem with that. I don't see it. I don't think of it as a positive or negative discrimination. It's just, where's the potential?
Yeah.
You know, so
that's a great way of putting it.
I get very frustrated at the moment when I sort of look across the pond and people are closing down EDI initiatives. And for me, there's a whole thing around, well, if you were political about that in the first place, rather than trying to do the best for your people and make people feel welcome and included, and I think you were probably, personally, I think you were probably doing the wrong thing. Everything we've done at STEP has been we haven't created an EDI role in the organization. We said, this is important, so we all have to do it. And and it's become part of expectation for virtually all of our roles. Of course, some people have had to take on some new things, but we've not hired a single EDI role. We've not created a single EDI role. We've made it part of day-to-day business.
And that's sort of what's happening now, is also as I suppose you know, the EDI flavor in the US is becoming, well, not is becoming, but has become you know, not au fait anymore, and illegal as well in certain circles as well. And but we're seeing companies taking it true ownership of it, you know, embedding it into their practices, their strategies, the way that they deal with teams and people in general, which is as it should be. And, you know, if we continue to go along those lines, hopefully there will be no need for people like us, for organizations like us, to show people how to embed inclusion.
I suspect you're going to be okay until you've well past retirement age, Rina. But I definitely, that's my hope for the future as well.
Yes, no, thank you. Likewise, absolutely. Thank you very much for your input. I think we have used our hour very, very well. We've heard some great ideas from you, great ways of how you introduce diversity and inclusion both into your everyday and also in a more strategic sense for STEP and its members and the volunteers. And I really appreciate it. So thank you for coming along. Thank you for being our very first leader to speak in our fireside chats. Not so fireside today because it's sunny. Really appreciate your time. Thank you very much, Mark.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you for inviting me and listening. Special thanks to all those who signed in, wherever and whatever time in the world it was.
Yes, great participation. Thank you. And we will be in touch. We'll follow up with everyone with an email, also with an announcement of our follow-up the next few months of speakers as well. And if you have any follow-up questions, you know where to find us. Thanks so much for joining. We'll see you next month. Thanks again.